Masechet Nedarim Daf Yod Tet. On the previous daf, we saw a Mishnah and a contradiction to it. The Mishnah here in Nedarim said, Stam Nedarim Lachmir. Someone says a Neder formula, but it's not clear. It's ambiguous. For example, he says this bread will be tiruma, like tiruma. Does he mean tiruma talishka, machazita shekel, which is prohibited by a vow? In that case, that would transfer to the bread and would become prohibited. Or does he mean tiruma of grain that's given to a kohen, which is prohibited from the Torah and not a vow, and therefore it does not transfer to the bread, and the bread would be permitted? We're not clear what he said. If so, stam nedarim. Any case of doubt, we are stringent in those cases. That is what our Mishnah said. But then we quoted a Mishnah in Masechet Taharot that said, safek nezirut lakel. If someone becomes a Nazir, says, I'm taking upon myself to be a Nazir, but it's doubtful, he put a condition on it, and we're not sure if the condition was fulfilled or not, then we assume that's for leniency. So how could the Mishnah here in the Nedarim say a Neder formula is for, that's ambiguous, is for stringency, and over there we said a doubtful case of Nazirut is for leniency? So we saw one response, and today we're going to follow up on that. Here's an outline of the daf today. Right? Mishnah Nedarim, stringency for doubtful Neder formula. Mishnah Taharot said lenient for doubtful Nazir formula. The first answer that we already began to see is that of Rabbi Zeira. He says that Mishnah in Nedarim is the opinion of Rabanan, whereas the Mishnah in Taharot is the opinion of Rabbi Eleazar. We saw Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Eleazar in some versions. So let's take the manuscripts, Rabbi Eleazar. We're going to question that today from two different challenges, because after all, Rabbi Eleazar is actually stringent regarding firstborn animals, and then we're going to explain that we're going to also challenge Rabbi Eleazar is stringent for a safek derabanan of liquids, so all the more so he should be stringent regarding a Nazir, which is deoraita. And so therefore we're going to reject the Rabbi Zeira's answer. We're going to come to a second one that based on the Braita, Nedarim is Rabbi Shimon, the Mishnah Taharot is Rabbi Yehuda. We're going to ask about that from the seifa of our very Mishnah, where Rabbi Yehuda is lenient, and we'll try to answer that, but in the end we're going to get stuck. And so a final answer will be just a variation of the second, that Nedarim is still Rabbi Shimon, but Taharot, we thought it would be Yehuda was speaking for himself in that Braita. In fact, he was speaking in the name of Rabbi Tarfon, and so the Mishnah and Taharot could be the opinion of Rabbi Tarfon. All right, this is a complex sugya, probably the hardest we've had in Masechet Nedarim. It does go through a lot of different issues, and some of the leaps in logic you have to fill in a couple of steps, but we will do our best. Okay, so here is Rabbi Zeira says that our Mishnah is Rabanan, and the one in Nedarim, and the one in Taharot is Rabbi Eleazar, who said Makdish Chayato b'mto ekdish et hakoi. Eleazar says lo ekdish et hakoi. We have this animal, we're not sure what it is, and Rabbi Eliezer said we always assume for leniency. Okay, and so according to Rabbi Eliezer, we're going to assume the same thing. This is in the context of the mammon, that you're donating this item to the Bet HaMikdash. So regarding mammon, we assume that a safek is for stringency according to Rabanan, and they would say the same thing regarding a Nazir, where it's for the person himself. And Rabbi Eliezer, who's lenient regarding money, well, we assume would also be lenient regarding the Nazir status of his own personhood, and so that's Rabbi Zeira's answer. Okay, and this is what we got up to, and all the more so for himself. Okay, so now Abaye is going to challenge Rabbi Zeira's answer. Amar le Abaye, B'mayokimta lisfek nezirut lahakel ke'Rabbi Eliezer. Abaye says, you assume that Mishnah in Taharot that says if a doubtful Nazir is for leniency, you answered that is the opinion of Rabbi Eleazar. Ema seifa, but look at the very next continuation of that Mishnah in Taharot, and tell me if it works. There it says, safek bechorot, echad bechore adam, vechad bechore behema, ben temea, ben tehora, hamosim echavero, alav hareaya. That's the end of the Mishnah. If someone's not sure about a bechor, you're not sure, let's say an animal gave birth to twins, and you're not sure which one came out first. And so whether it be a bechor of a person, maybe a mother gave birth to twins, and we got mixed up. We don't know which one was first, which one was second. So now you have to do pidyon haben. So you have to give, what do you have to do? Going to give pidyon haben for this one or for that one? Or bechor behema, if it's a behema tehora, a kosher animal, then you give it to the kohen and it becomes a sacrifice. If it's a non-kosher animal, then like a donkey, which you cannot sacrifice, that is given to the kohen as a gift. Now, in all these cases, since there's a safek, we say, the kohen is trying to take it from you, let him bring a proof. If the kohen can prove that this particular animal is the bechor, then he can go and take it. But if there's a doubt, then he cannot take it. Okay, so that's the rule regarding the monetary aspect of it. But Vetane Allah, notice that the Mishnah only talks about the monetary aspect. There was also prohibitions regarding an animal that's a bechor. You are not allowed to work it. You can't put a burden on it. And so will it have that? Which one will have the ritual prohibitions? Avasurim begizav avoda. Any of them that are a safek, if two are born, then you cannot work either one or shear either of the animals, because we have to assume stringency for ritual, even though we're lenient regarding money, because regarding money, we have that principle that the kohen has to prove before he can get it. But ritually, if there's a prohibition, safek, deoraita, we have to be machmir. Okay, so that's the continuation of that very Mishnah. We see from the continuation of the Mishnah that when you have a doubt, you have to be stringent. And if you say that Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Eleazar, and Rabbi Eleazar says when you're in doubt, you should be lenient, well, then you have a contradiction, because it can't be Rabbi Eleazar who says lenient if the continuation says stringent. Okay, now in truth, there's actually an internal contradiction within this very baraita between the case of Nazir and the case of Bechor that we'd have to answer either way. In any case, Rabbi Zeira comes to the rescue and will explain the Mishnah and thereby also answer the question. Amar le, amai kamidamet kedusha haba'a me'eleha li kedusha haba'a bide adam. Rabbi Zeira says to Abaye, how can you compare the kedusha, the holiness that comes by itself? That's the case of Bechor. The second is born, then it's already sanctified in and of itself. You don't have to do anything. We did see on the previous daf that it would be the customary practice for the person to also make a vow formula for the firstborn, but is actually not necessary. So since that comes in and of itself, it comes on its own, that's going to be stringent. And that's different from holiness or sanctification that comes because of a volition of a person, like a Nazir, when a person takes upon himself and say, I will be a Nazir. In that case, it depends on his mindset. And it could very well be that a person would not want to become a Nazir unless he was sure that he was being a Nazir. And so, in the case of doubt, we will assume for leniency. So these are totally different cases. And that's how I stick to my guns. And in fact, the Mishnah in Taharot is Rabbi Eleazar. Rabbi Eleazar is lenient regarding Nizirut because it's something he's taking upon himself. And the rest of the Mishnah is also Rabbi Eleazar. There he's strict because that Bechor is something that happens on its own. Okay, good. So Rabbi Zeira saved his answer for the time being. Ela I kashya hakashya, but we're going to have a second challenge to Rabbi Zeira just to see where we are in the outline. We have Rabbi Zeira's answer. We had one challenge to it from the firstborn. And now we're going to have a second challenge. This one is going to be long, and we have to put together a few sources for it. But the upshot of it is going to be that we see that Rabbi Eleazar is actually stringent, even for a safek derabanan. If he's stringent for a safek derabanan, surely he would be strict regarding doubtful Nazir, which is a deoraita. And so it really doesn't make sense that Rabbi Eleazar would be the author of the Mishnah Taharot. So let's see where we're going to learn this from. Safek mashkin li tameh tameh le tameh acherim tahor. Regarding liquids, can liquids become tameh? Yes, they can on a doraita level. Can liquids make something else tameh? No, they can. No, they cannot on the Doraita level, only on the derabanan level. This is the opinion of Rabbi Meir. For this reason, if we have a doubt whether a tameh person touched the liquid, we're not sure if he touched it or not, well, that would be a safek on a biblical level, because if he did touch it, then it would be biblically tameh. So safek d'oraita, we're going to be machmir. Whereas if we're not sure, a certain drop of impure liquid fell near a loaf of bread, but we're not sure if it touched it or not, in that case, since in any case, if it touched it, it will only be derabanan, so therefore safek derabanan lehakel. That's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. V'chen haya Rabbi Eleazar Omer kidvarav. Rabbi Eleazar also said the same thing. So right now, we're at Rabbi Eleazar would say safek deoraita would be a chumrah. Now this by itself could be a problem, because if a safek is for chumrah, then how come he said before that a safek for a Nazir is lekula? Okay, so far there's not yet a question, because Tumah is like Bechor. It's something that comes in and of itself. The second it touches it, surely it is Tameh. Whereas Nazir depends on the volition of a person, where we have to take it into account. Maybe he meant it, maybe he didn't mean it. He maybe wouldn't want to be a Nazir if there was some doubt. Okay, so this by itself is not the challenge, but rather the further discussion. Hold on, does Rabbi Eleazar really think that liquids can become impure, that they receive impurity on a Doraita level? Rabbi Eleazar omer en tumah lemashkin kol ikar. Rabbi Eleazar said, no, liquids do not become tameh at all. How does he know that? Rabbi Eleazar is going to prove his statement. Teda sharei ha'id Yosef ben Yoezer ish sereda al el kamsa dachan val mashkin bet mitbachaya dachan. And Rabbi Eleazar himself learned that from a much earlier stage, from the time of the second Bet HaMikdash. Rabbi Yosef, not Rabbi, just Yosef ben Yoezer ish sereda. The people in those times, the sages, did not yet have the title of Rabbi, like Hillel, Shammai. They were just known by their name. And he, in Eduyot, has a testimony regarding El Kamsa. El Kamsa is a type of grasshopper, and he said Dachan. Dachan is Aramaic for tahor. So he thought that this grasshopper is pure. El Kamsa seems to be called El because it reminds us of an ayil, right? You see the horns of this gazelle here, and the antenna of this grasshopper looks similar. So number one, he said this type of grasshopper is kosher, and that's not relevant for us. The other one is mashkin bet mitbachaya dachan, that liquids that are found in the Bet HaMikdash area, the area mitbach, the place in the courtyard where they slaughter the animals and skin them, then there's going to be lots of blood there and water that they use to wash off the bodies of the animal sacrifices, and all of that is pure. Now in the Bet HaMikdash, one rule is that they do not have to be stringent for derabanan laws. If it's deoraita impurity, then that will be a problem. But for derabanan, that's okay. So what we can learn from here, surely, is that according to the Eleazar, liquids receiving tumah, certainly giving tumah, even receiving tumah, is not deoraita. It's at best only derabanan. So now we have an internal challenge within the Rabbi Eleazar. On the one hand, here he says that safek liquids are going to be receiving tumah is going to be stringent, which sounds like it's a biblical prohibition, and here it sounds like it's only a rabbinic prohibition, because that in the Bet HaMikdash we assume are pure. Now let's try to solve that first. Shmuel interpreted this testimony here when it said dachan, that this is pure. That only means pure in terms of not making something else tameh. So that's what we're not worried about in the Bet HaMikdash. We're not worried about tumah liquids touching other liquids, because that's surely only derabanan. But even in this testimony, becoming tameh itself, that we do worry about, even according to this Yosef ben Yoezer. So according to Shmuel, we have no problem, because this whole testimony here, even when Eleazar says en tumah lemashkin kol ikar, it's a little hard to fit into the words. What he meant is that It does not impart impurity, but it does receive impurity because it does receive impurity on a biblical level, even in the Bet HaMikdash. So for Shemuel, there's no contradiction, and where we'd be okay. Ela lerav, Damar dachan mamash, but Rav says totally pure, and they don't even receive tum'ah. So according to the Eleazar, receiving of tum'ah is only derabanan. And so, how would you reconcile it? The only way to reconcile it, the Gemara doesn't finish off the question. We have the commentaries have to finish it off for him. Is that so? That how could it be that this is derabanan? Then what does he mean over here when the Eleazar agrees with Meir and says a doubtful case of liquid even receiving is tameh? Must be he thinks that a safek derabanan is also lechumra. This is an amazing thing to find such a rule, safek derabanan lechumra. Throughout halacha l'maaseh nowadays, we always say safek derabanan lekula, which makes life a lot easier. So many teshuvot of Racham Ovadia Yosef rely on this. If we had to be machmir on every derabanan, then it would be a lot of stringencies. Okay, but anyway, for to be Eleazar, we just proved, according to Rav's interpretation, that he thinks that it is l'chumra. If so, if he would be machmir even for a safek derabanan, then surely for a safek nazir deoraita, which is deoraita, he would be stringent, and therefore we do not accept Rabbi Zera's answer that the Mishnah in Taharot is the opinion of Rabbi Eleazar. So we're rejecting here number 1, and we're going to move on to number 2. That's not said in anybody's name. And here's the second answer. Ella ha Rabbi Yehuda ha Rabbi Shimon. The Mishnah in Taharot is actually the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, whereas our Mishnah that he's lenient. Our Mishnah here in Nedarim, that's stringent, is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Well, what do they say? The Tanya. Harini Nazirim yesh bakeri hazeh me'akor v'halachum so shenignav o she'avad. Rabbi Yehuda matir, Rabbi Shimon oser. This is our very case. This is very good. Very relevant source. If someone says, I will be a Nazir if in this heap of grain there is 100 kor, a measurement of wheat. I guess he's making a bet with someone, right? This looks like 100, I bet there's 100, I'll be a Nazir. If there is. Now, he went and looked for it. He went and looked and found that if they were going to go count it, right, to go measure it to see what it is, but it was stolen or it got lost, it blew away. And now there's no way for him to tell if he's actually Nazir, if his condition was fulfilled or not. Rabbi Yehuda is lenient because Rabbi Yehuda says a person's only going to take upon himself to be a Nazir if he surely wants to be a Nazir. And so safek is le'akel, and that would accord with the Mishnah in Taharot that said safek Nazir is lekula, whereas our Mishnah Nedarim is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Just like he says, safek Nazir here is stringent. That's also because any neder that someone says ambiguous language, we're going to be machmir. Okay, so now this is sounds like a good solution to the problem, but not so fast. Did Rabbi Yehuda really say that he's lenient in all cases like this? We have a contradiction. We're assuming that Rabbi Yehuda's reasoning is that in the case of Nazir, a person would not take upon himself voluntarily an obligation if he was not sure that by saying this he was actually going to take upon himself the obligation. Right? I'm not going to be a Nazir. I'm not going to say I'm not going to be a Nazir unless I'm sure that I really want to be a Nazir. So a person doesn't do it out of a doubt. So therefore, if there is any doubt regarding his formula, regarding the circumstances, regarding the condition, then he's not a Nazir, unless it's very clear and a sure thing that when he says it, he will be a Nazir. Only then does a person take it upon himself. That is the reason why Rabbi Yehuda says safek Nazir is for leniency. Now, does he really say that whenever we have a safek, we're going to be lenient? Or mean he? Rabbi Yehuda omer, stam tiruma, biuda asura, ubagalil muteret. She'en anshe galil makirin et terumat halishka. Now we're going to compare it to what Rabbi Yehuda says in our Mishnah, the end of our Mishnah, which the beginning of our Mishnah was the opinion of Rabbi Meir, that said anytime you have a safek regarding a neder, it's going to be stringent. But Rabbi Yehuda says not always. So look at this. Even though we're asking about Nazir, we're assuming it's the same for Nazir or for Neder in general. And Rabbi Yehuda is the one that said, when it comes to teruma, and someone said, this bread will be like teruma, it didn't specify. Do you mean teruma talishka? Chatzi shekel, and that's a vow, so they'll make it prohibited. Or do you mean teruma of grain, which is prohibited from the Torah, in which case the loaf would be permitted? Now, if we don't know what he meant, Yehuda asura. In Yehuda, they use both formulas, so we don't know what the person meant, so therefore we have to assume stringency. Ubegalil muteret. In Galil, we assume leniency because the people of Galil do not know what Terumat Halishka is. They are far away from Jerusalem. They don't practice Machazit Shekel. It was from a long time ago, and therefore, when they say Teruma, they don't mean Terumat Halishka because they don't know of that concept. Instead, they always mean Teruma of grain, and therefore, and that's permitted. And therefore, in the Galil, if they say Teruma Stam, then they will be permitted. Now, Tamad and Makirin, in Galil, the only reason why it's permitted is because they don't know the formula of stringency. The Ha-Makirin, Asurin, but if they did know that Teruma can be used in both ways, and they knew what Terumat Halishka was, then it would be prohibited, which is in fact the case for Yehuda, where they know both formulas, presumably they know both formulas, that's the reason for stringency. So we see that even the Rabbi Yehuda thinks that safek would be for stringency. In other words, a short way of this challenge is, the whole reason you got into this challenge is because we wanted to distinguish between Mishnah Nedarim, where stringency is for where we're stringent for doubtful cases, and Mishnah Taharot. So we said, Mishnah Taharot is Rabbi Yehuda, who does say regarding a Nazir that he's going to be a doubtful Nazir, that he'll be lenient. But in that very Mishnah Nedarim, in the seifa, it brings an exact case that is similar to the Rabbi Meir, and the difference between the Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda is just regarding language usage in Galil. Do they know this or not? But they both agree that if they use both formulas and you don't know what the person means, then we're stringent. So by ascribing Mishnah Tarot to Rabbi Yehuda, you're really not helping, because Rabbi Yehuda is mentioned in Nedarim itself. So what are you going to do with that? So Hamakin Asur Amarava Gabe Keri Kasavar Kosher Sefako Hamor Mivadai Lo Ma'ayel Nafsha Lisfeka Teilu Gabe Nazir Vadai Megalech Umevi Korban V'nechal Sefeko La Maseh Megaleach. Rava explains there's a difference between Nazir and other cases. Regarding Keri, means the grain, that refers to the Braita of the grain. If someone says, if there's 100 kud in there, I'll be a Nazir. In that case, regarding the Nazir, any time, and in this case, this is one instance where being in a state of doubt is worse than being in a state of certainty, and that is true regarding a Nazir. Because he'll explain why. If the doubt is worse than the certainty, then the person would not put himself into doubt, we can assume. And regarding a Nazir Vadai, it's better to be for sure a certain Nazir than to be a safek Nazir. Because a certain Nazir, he can bring his korban, and then he can cut his hair. It's the wrong order here. Really, you have to bring the korban first, and only then you can shave your head. He can cut his hair. And the nechel, he can eat the korbanot also. That's incidental. It doesn't really matter that you can eat the korban. The point is that if someone is definitely Nazir, it comes to an end. He brings his korbanot, and one of them being a chatat, and then he can cut his hair, and then and then it's done with. He's over, right? So that's it. 30 days or however long he says. But if someone is a safek Nazir, then he's really in a bind. He cannot cut his hair ever for his whole life. Why? Because you cannot cut your hair until you bring the korbanot. One of the korbanot is a korban hatat. A korban hatat, I'm not allowed to bring to the Bet HaMikdash if I don't have to. You can't volunteer to bring a korban hatat. And you're not allowed to bring a regular, non-sacred animal to the Bet HaMikdash. And therefore, this guy, he's not sure if he's a Nazir or not. If he is a Nazir, he can't cut his hair until he brings a korban. But if he's not a Nazir, he can't bring a korban. He can't bring korban chatat. So he's stuck. He can't bring it. He can't not bring it. He cannot cut his hair because he's stuck in this loop. And so it's worse to be a safek Nazir. So Rabbi Yehuda is saying that generally when we have a safek, we'll be, I'm happy to be stringent. But if the safek is going to be worse than the vadai, then I think we have to be lenient. And so that's the reason how we can reconcile Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda in the Nedarim is saying, yes, in fact, if there's a safek in a person's language, he says teruma this way or that way, and he uses both phrases, then we're going to be machmir. But when a person makes a bet on a heap, and he's not sure what happened because it blew away, in that case, we're going to have to be lenient, because surely a person would not put himself into a state of safek Nazir, which is the worst problem, or worst of all worlds, even worse than being a for sure Nazir. So surely there will be lenient upon him, and he didn't mean to put himself in the state of safek Nazir, so that's why he's lenient. So we can reconcile Rabbi Yehuda in that baraita of Nazir and in our Mishnah. So far, so good. But not out of the woods yet. Amar le Rav Huna bar Yehuda le Rava. Amar hareni Nazir olam mai. What would Rabbi Yehuda say about a person who says, I'll be a Nazir olam, I'll be a permanent Nazir if there's 100 cord in that pile? Now, the baraita didn't specify what kind of Nazir is going to be, so it should include any case that Rabbi Yehuda would be lenient. But if a person says, I'll be a Nazir olam, then being a Nazir forever for his whole life is not more stringent than being a safek Nazir or a Nazir olam. Either way, they can't cut their hair for their entire lives. So in that instance of Nazir olam, even if we apply this rule, we only say that Rabbi Yehuda would be lenient if the being a certain Nazir is worse than being a safek Nazir. But Nazir olam, it would be the same. And yet, Rabbi Yehuda seems to say he's lenient. So what are you going to do about that case? And how would you reconcile that Rabbi Yehuda with Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah? Amar le Nazir olam nami sefeko hamor mivadai. Rava answers him and says, actually, a Nazir olam also has something that is in a way better than being a safek Nazir. There is a law about Nazir olam that when his hair becomes very heavy, very long, he is permitted to bring a razor and lighten his hair, meaning get a trim, and he'll bring the three animals, and Nazir would have to at the end. Now he's going to continue being a Nazir because he's Nazir olam, but he is allowed to take a trim, whereas a safek Nazir is not even allowed to take a trim. There's no permission for that, and so you see that a safek Nazir is worse even than a Nazir olam, and so the Rabbi Yehuda's principle would still apply, and he would be lenient even in the case of a safek Nazir olam, according to his principle. All right, but one last blow. Amar areni Nazir Shimshon mai. What if a person says, I am going to be a Nazir Shimshon? That's a type of Nazir olam who also cannot cut his hair at all, even doesn't have this loophole of bringing the three korbanot. And certainly that one is equivalent to being a safek Nazir, to be a Nazir like Shimshon. So what are you going to do about that? Amar le Rava said, Nazir Shimshon la tanya. No, we don't have such thing as a Nazir Shimshon. You can't make yourself a Nazir like Shimshon. Shimshon was a Nazir, but you can't apply that to other people. Shimshon had was a different kind of Nazir. For example, he can become tameh. He was a warrior. He was killing people all the time. And so Shimshon only had the other prohibitions of cutting his hair and wine, but not that one. So he says, no, you can't make yourself a Nazir Shimshon. Amar lev hamar Ravada barahava tanya Nazir Shimshon. And but Rav Huna says that's not true, because Ravada barahava quotes a braita discussing if someone makes himself Nazir Shimshon. It is a concept. You can make yourself a Nazir like Shimshon. Amar le itanya tanya. Rava said, if it's a braita, I can't argue on it. And you're right, that would be a problem for my interpretation, because if you have Nazir Shimshon, and that is a type of Nazirut, and so this would be a challenge for Rabbi Yehuda. In that Braita, he said, he makes a condition, if there's this number of 100 kor in the pile, then I'll be a Nazir. That seems to include even if it was a Nazir Shimshon, but Nazir Shimshon is actually not worse than, is not better than being a safek Nazir, and therefore they should not be mekel, and so we cannot reconcile Rabbi Yehuda. Since Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah says a safek regarding a neder formula is machmir, and now we also found a case in regarding a Nazir. The example is Nazir Shimshon, but even one case will prove that even if for a Nazir, Rabbi Yehuda is machmir, therefore Rabbi Yehuda cannot be the author, not of the Mishnah Nedarim. He also can't be the author of that Baraita, where Rabbi Yehuda is in conflict with Rabbi Shimon, because in that Baraita it says, anytime you have a safek of a Nazir, it's lekula. So Rav Ashi is going to answer now both questions. Both, who is that Rabbi Yehuda in that Baraita of the pile of wheat, and then that will also answer the question of who is the author of our Mishnah in a third way. Rav Ashi amar Rahi Rabbi Yehuda mishum Rabbi Tarfon hi. That Baraita, when it says Rabbi Yehuda, it wasn't Rabbi Yehuda's own opinion, but rather is Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rabbi Tarfon, who was a senior sage, his teacher. Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda mishum Rabbi Tarfon omer, en echad mehem nazir, lefi shelo nitena nazirut, ela lehafla'a. Rabbi Tarfon says about an interesting case that we will get to, about a few people, they're making a bet on a certain person that's coming. They can't quite see in the distance who it is, and one says, I'm a Nazir if this is so-and-so. The other one says, I'm a Nazir if it's not so-and-so. The other one says, I'll be Nazir if both of you are Nazirim, and so on. And Rabbi Tarfon is machloket about which one will be a Nazir or not. And Rabbi Tarfon says none of them are Nazir, because Nazirut can only take effect in an explicit statement. If you have a conditional, I'll be a Nazir if, the second you say if, then the person's already not a Nazir. Because it says in the Pasuk, Ki yipaleh leafli neder. And so you have to explicitly say, I want to be a Nazir. You have to really mean it. And if there's any condition, even if the condition comes true, the person is not a Nazir. So Rabbi Tarfon would say, in all cases, in that Baraita, when it says, I'll be a Nazir if there's 100 kor in that pile. Even if there is 100 kor, even if it didn't blow away, he still is not a Nazir. And so Rabbi Tarfon certainly could be the author of the Mishnah in Nedarim that says, yeah, Nazir, any case of Nazir, any doubt, surely we will be lenient. Okay, quick last question on that. How come that Baraita, where's machlok between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda, who we're not explaining as Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rabbi Tarfon, why does it say in the case it's a case of it was stolen or it got lost? Even if it wasn't stolen, got lost, and it was there, and you counted it, and there was 100 kor, you still wouldn't be a Nazir according to Rabbi Tarfon because he made it conditional. So why talk about that case? Oh, that wasn't there to teach us something about Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rabbi Tarfon. He would be lenient in no matter what. It mentioned this that to show us the stringency of Rabbi Shimon. To teach us that according to Rabbi Shimon, even if it was stolen or got lost, we would still assume stringency. In other words, not only will it be stringent if it's there and we can count it and the condition is fulfilled, even if we're not sure, we can't figure it out, and we never know if the condition was happened or not, Rabbi Shimon is going to be stringent. And so, in summary, we have three answers to this question. Rabbi Zeira, the first one was that Mishnah in Taharot was the opinion of Rabbi Eleazar, and then we rejected that second one as opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and then we tweaked that and said, yes, it is the Rabbi Yehuda in that Baraita, but Rabbi Yehuda in that Baraita is actually Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rabbi Tarfon, and that final answer stands. The last part of the daf addresses the end of the Mishnah, where we quoted part of it already. Rabbi Yehuda omer stam tiruma bihuda. Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that if you say just this bread will be like tiruma, in Yehuda it's forbidden because they use two different formulas. In Galil, people are not familiar with tiruma talishka, and therefore we assume that it's leniency because the only teruma they know is teruma of grain, and teruma of grain is prohibited from the Torah, and therefore will not create a vow. That was Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, and we already derived from this hamakirin asurin. If they would know, then it would be prohibited if they did use both formulas as they do in Yehuda. Okay, alma sefeka lechumra. Therefore, according to the Yehuda, he would agree actually with Rabbi Meir and the whole rest of the Mishnah that in the case of doubt of a neder, we would be stringent. It's only a matter of language. If in Galil there's no doubt at all, so then fine, then we'll be lenient. All right, that is the first case there that surely the Yehuda said. That's followed up with another case, and there's no name for the second case, so anyone reading the Mishnah would assume that this next case is also that of the Yehuda. But the principle is in contradiction. Ema seifa, setam haramim. Someone says this item will be cherem. Now cherem could also have two meanings. This cherem will be that it's consecrated to the Bet HaMikdash. In that case, that is a vow that's prohibited, and that vow would transfer to the bread, and the bread would be prohibited. But if I say this will be a cherem to a kohen, then that just means that's something I'm giving it to a kohen as a monetary gift, but it's not consecrated. There's no prohibition on it for him to share it or to give it back or whatever. And if I say this bread will be like a cherem to a kohen, then it's permitted. If I don't say anything at all, just say this bread will be like a cherem, then which one is it? So according to the Meir, he said, well, since both languages are used, we have to be machmir safek lechumra. But this last statement that looks like it's a continuation of the Yehuda says, Bihuda mutarin bagalil asurin. In Yehuda it's permitted. In Galil it's prohibited. She'en anshe Galil makirin et chermei kohanim. Because in the Galil, people don't know this phrase of a cherem that goes to a kohen. They're not familiar with that. So if they're saying cherem, they mean automatically cherem to the Bet HaMikdash. Now, we can derive from this, hamakirin mutarin. If the Anshe Galil did know both options, then surely they would say permitted. And that, in fact, is what happens in Yehuda. Yehuda, presumably, they know both formulas, and yet it's permitted. So you see that the author of this thinks that alma sefeka lekula, that in the case of doubt, we're going to be lenient. Okay, good question. So what do you do with this last? Can't be the Yehuda. Amar Abaye, seifa Rabbi Eleazar Rabbi Sadoki. Oh, in fact, it doesn't say his name, but it must be that the last phrase, the last statement, is by Rabbi Eleazar in the name of Rabbi Sadok, or son of Rabbi Sadok. Tetanya, Rabbi Yehuda omer setam tiruma bihuda asura. Rabbi Eleazar Rabbi Sadok omer setam haramim bagalil asurin. We have a braita here where you see Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Eleazar have different opinions. So Rabbi Yehuda says, Teruma in Yehuda, they use both formulas, and so safek is asura. Whereas Rabbi Eleazar, Rabbi Sadok says stam haramim in the Galil are asurin. That's because in Galil they only know the stringent formula that of cherem that goes to the Bet HaMikdash. So it's only because of there's no safek at all there. That's why he would prohibit. But in any case of safek, and that presumably would include all the cases in the Mishnah, in our Mishnah above, where there was a safek, Rabbi Sadok said, if you use both, Rabbi Eleazar, Rabbi Sadok would say, if you use both formulas and you're not sure which one you're referring to because you used the short form, then in all those cases, he would say, Stam Nedarim, Lehakel, then he would be lenient. Baruch Adonai L'olam, Amen v'Amen.